Well, it's possible it gets enough. I mean, the one thing I would say, just to sort of balance out the good news of Bob Corker acting semi-responsibly, is that progressives should really scratch their heads and wonder if you can pull a bunch of GOP senators onto this bill, whether the bill is as good as it's being billed. I mean, that should really make you question the actual content of the bill. You wonder if the GOP is able to sort of come on board this bill, if it's going to offer the kind of fundamental change after the biggest crisis in 80 years that's really necessary.
On the issue of Scott Brown, Chris, he's turning out to be a hoot as a senator.
That was Palin-esque. I mean, that was amazing.
You just try to diagram the sentence, and it's like, wow, this is way above my pay grade. But I mean, he's been interesting so far, mostly because he keeps getting caught cold making stuff up and then refusing to take it back, even when he gets really nailed on it. But I wonder if Scott Brown could be a constructively engaged Republican on this. I mean, there's a possibility that he really just doesn't understand what he's voting on and what he's talking about, and so he's not going to be constructive because he's not capable of it. But there's also the possibility that he just came across poorly in his recent interviews, and he might actually be interested in working with Democrats. Do you have a sense of which it is?
Well, look, the president and the White House clearly thinks it's the latter, right? Because the president's calling him from Air Force One today. And, you know, they got his vote on the jobs bill, which was one of his first votes, which signaled, I think, to people that, yes, you know, this is someone who might vote his state constituents' desires rather than, the Tea Party sort, et cetera. I mean, what's clear is that it's not just Scott Brown. A lot of people in the United States Senate, I can tell you from doing some reporting on this, have no clue about this bill. They have no clue about financial reform. They have no clue about what's good and what's bad. They are getting their talking points from the leadership. If you grabbed any of them, and this is actually on both sides of the aisle, and asked them about the details of this bill, they wouldn't do a lot better than Scott Brown. So I think it's going to be one of these decisions that ultimately the leadership's going to be making at the top that's going to filter down.
That is so depressing. So depressing. I will tell you, I have found that what you just described on the financial reform legislation, when I have talked to senators, not staffers, but actual senators, off air, off camera, off the record about about filibuster reform, I have found the exact same thing, a shocking level of just basic ignorance on what it is that they do for their jobs. It's sometimes amazing.
A lot of it is, there's a lot of specialization which takes place. So if you're dealing with an issue with a sitting legislator and it's not their committee, you know, that's not something they're going to have a real deep command of, particularly when you're dealing with something as complex as this.
Good reminder. Very depressing. Chris Hayes, Washington editor of The Nation, thank you for your time tonight and for using interlocutor in a sentence so well. Appreciate it.
We always try to bring it. Thank you, Rachel.
Thank you. Washington, D.C. has by far the most interesting license plate in the country. See, it says there on the bottom, taxation without representation. That is not a salute to the Revolutionary War and the colonists. That is the current status of residents of Washington, D.C. today. Washingtonians pay federal taxes, but they have no voting representative in the federal government. And their best chance in years to rectify that injustice today went kaput. D.C.'s non-voting delegate to Congress, Eleanor Holmes Norton, pulled a bill that would have given D.C. an actual vote in the House. Even though Democrats thought they might have been able to pass that bill this year, gun rights supporters had attached to it what they call a poison pill amendment. The amendment would have gutted D.C.'s locally passed gun laws. The amendment was drafted by the NRA. Eleanor Holmes Norton described what it would do as, quote, a person in the district would be able to walk on the streets carrying an assault weapon slung over her shoulder or with concealed weapons. D.C. might not be able to ban guns at public and charter schools. She added, these provisions are so over the top, they are unworthy of serious consideration. So the majority black, majority Democratic-leaning residents of Washington will continue to be taxed by the federal government without being allowed to elect a voting representative in that government. And it's because pro-gun politicians from other states think they should make decisions for D.C. about public safety instead of letting D.C. decide for itself. And somehow, someone, somewhere, will try to tell you those politicians are acting in a way that should be called conservative. And if that's true, then the word conservative has lost all meaning.
This is not a hate fest. It is a love fest. It's a love fest. So turn around, go to the person next to you, and high-five them because you are the special forces. You are the elites of the American gun rights movement, which, without the gun rights movement, there would be no rights. Okay. Now, there's a certain reporter made comments, Rachel Maddow, and all I have to say to her, it's a good thing that this is a love fest. Otherwise, we tar and feather you.
There were two would-be armed pro-gun rallies in and near Washington, coinciding yesterday with the 15th anniversary of the bombing of the Alfred P. Murrah Federal Building in Oklahoma City. That shout-out you just heard to the Rachel Maddow show there came during the rally that was in Washington, D.C. That's the one where people weren't actually armed, because if they were armed, that would have been against the law in D.C. But demonstrators in Virginia were very much armed. They gathered initially on national park land, where, thanks to a law signed by President Obama earlier this year expanding gun rights in national parks, it was perfectly legal for them to carry their weapons. Must have been sort of bamboozling and frustrating to the people who were there to complain about their gun rights being impinged by President Obama that they were only able to be there in that way because he expanded their gun rights. That said, as you can see, there weren't actually all that many people at either of these pro-gun rallies. Several estimates put dozens at the armed rally in Virginia and hundreds at the unarmed rally in Washington, D.C. Those low numbers, though, didn't stop an actual member of Congress from turning out to address this teeny tiny group of people with empty gun holsters at the Washington rally.
Fellow patriots, we have a lot of domestic enemies of the Constitution, and they're right down the mall in the Congress of the United States. And right down Independence Avenue in the White House that belongs to us. It's not about my ability to hunt, which I love to do. It's not about the ability for me to protect my family and my property against criminals, which we have the right to do. But it's all about us protecting ourselves from a tyrannical government of the United States.
That's what we're going to use our guns for. That wasn't just some random guy at the rally. That was a congressman. Congressman Paul Brown of Georgia. His remarks on the occasion of the 15th anniversary of the bombing in Oklahoma City that killed 168 people, that was carried out by an anti-government extremist. Leading up to that grim anniversary, President Clinton delivered a speech in Washington, reflecting on the response to the Oklahoma City bombing at the time and what we can do as a nation to prevent such a thing from happening again. To that end, the former president remarked on the difference between criticizing the government and inciting violence against the government and people who work for it.
We can't let the debate veer so far into hatred that we lose focus of our common humanity. It's really important. We can't ever fudge the fact that there is a basic line dividing criticism from violence or its advocacy. What we learned from Oklahoma City is not that we should gag each other or that we should reduce our passion for the positions we hold, but that the words we use really do matter, because there's this vast echo chamber, and they go across space and they fall on the serious and the delirious alike. They fall on the connected and the unhinged alike.
Those remarks, and President Clinton echoing them in a written op-ed in the New York Times, have proved to be upsetting for some commentators on the political right.
So I guess you can't be critical. You can't say socialism exists. You can't be critical of government. I thought this was the highest form of patriotism when the criticism was aimed at George W. Bush. Something's happened. I must have missed it. What happened here?
Well, apparently it's hate speech when it's on the right, and it's not hate speech when it's on the left. So, you know, go figure where that comes from.
Rupert Murdoch's New York Post editorial board took this line one step further, not just criticizing President Clinton for cautioning against inciting language, but actually blaming the Clinton administration for the Oklahoma City bombing, saying, quote, McVeigh never cited talk show hosts as inspiration. Rather, he pointed a finger at Clinton's own administration. Oklahoma City was a retaliatory strike, McVeigh wrote in a letter to the media, a counterattack for the cumulative raids and subsequent violence and damage that federal agents had participated in over the preceding years, including but not limited to Waco. So the New York Post explaining how, really, if you think about it, the Oklahoma City bombing was the federal government's fault. They weren't the only voice on the right to go there and to also lash out at President Clinton.
Let me Ask